We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and with me is Chris Calandra, our Wallet Watch contributor from Elliott Wealth Management. Chris, how you doing today?
It's been a great day so far. I hope it's the same for you, Eric.
Going well. So, there's been a lot of talk right now on both ends on whether or not we have the risk of a recession. Some say it's a foregone conclusion. Some say it's completely avoidable. Where do you stand on all this?
I don't believe it's a foregone conclusion, Eric, but the risks, the likelihood of a recession are growing rapidly. History teaches us that when the Federal Reserve has to fight inflation aggressively, which it's poised to do, that is an activity that pushes the economy into a recession. It's not the intent of the Federal Reserve, but by raising interest rates aggressively to combat inflation, you often choke off economic growth. And if you think about it, Eric, the numbers that we're seeing inflation-wise, the most comparable period is that late 70s, early 1980s, when you had rampant inflation, you had stagflation, and the Federal Reserve aggressively went after inflation during that period, and it did touch off a recession early in Ronald Reagan's first term. And if you are looking at history to help you as a guide, a recession is very likely. Now, can it be avoided? Yes, it can be avoided. We're in a different economy than we were back then, more technology and information driven, but the risks are higher, and you're seeing more and more talk about it. And sometimes even just to talk about it, Eric, could become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, we've seen that with economic conditions before. The more people worry about it, the more it actually happens. Economists from the Biden administration, of course, are pushing against this. They're saying, well, the economy is strong enough that we won't have a recession. And they point to job growth, record low unemployment. But the inflation that we're dealing with and what the Fed is going to have to do to combat this, that's really going to take a big chunk out of any economic gains we have, isn't it?
It seems very likely. They bring up good points because we do have a strong economy and job growth has been strong, and it's a very strong labor market. If you want to get a job today or want to switch jobs, it is a very good period to be looking at those things. But I believe what the administration is not accounting for is the Fed really hasn't geared up just yet to combat inflation. They raised interest rates for the first time in March. They're signaling that there's going to be lots more to come, including raising rates at larger increments than they've done over the recent past. So you haven't really seen the economy react to the policy impact that the Federal Reserve is going to be rolling out. We'll have to see if the administration is right. History again tells us that that's may not be the case, but I understand the Biden administration, they need, and any administration would do this, is to speak positively about the market to fight against pessimism and fight against that self-fulfilling prophecy of expecting a recession and then magically getting one.
Now, isn't part of the problem that the Fed is facing is that they kept interest rates artificially low for so long, they were sort of left without any bows in their quiver, rather any arrows in their quiver to fight off a recession, other than dealing with inflation with these massive interest rate hikes.
Yes, I think that the Federal Reserve is in for a decent amount of criticism. I think it's fair. They reacted very strongly to the pandemic and took extraordinary measures to negotiate through what occurred with the pandemic and the related economic closures. But it seems like, and I am of this opinion, that they kept this emergency footing for longer than was necessary. And that is going to perhaps come at a heavy price. And that price is starting to be paid in the form of inflation.
And it's not just the emergency steps they took during the pandemic, because they did the same thing during the Great Recession, lowering rates incredibly low. And they were very slow to start raising them again. And then they almost immediately had to bring them back down to deal with the pandemic.
That's true. But the first time around after the Great Recession, they did get away with it. They lowered interest rates and kept interest rates very, very low. But in the lens of inflation, they got away with it. You think back to the Great Recession, the expectation by many people was that you would get inflation coming out of the Great Recession. It's one of the reasons why gold, as an example, did so well, but that never materialized. This time, it seems like they didn't get away with it because inflation, because of what occurred, and there's lots of factors in this, but it touched off inflation, very strong inflation with 7.9% in 2021. Again, you haven't seen this in 40 years or so. So they have their work cut out for them. And now they are between the rock and a hard place because the administration, the Biden administration, they're not too anxious to see talk of a recession or a slowdown. In fact, they want to put more money into circulation if they had their way. And the Federal Reserve has to balance the needs of the administration with their charter of maintaining price stability. And we don't have price stability really today with this super red hot inflation.
Right. Economists prior to the American Rescue Plan said that pouring that much money into the economy was going to spur inflation. Now, putting more money in, you're just going to put gasoline on the fire. And they're really putting the Fed in a tough position because the Fed needs to manage inflation. If the administration keeps pouring more money into it, the Fed's back is really up against the wall.
Yes, you could, especially depending on the outcome of the midterm elections, you could have, and it seems unlikely today if you believe the polling, which is always dangerous, is if you had a Congress, Senate, and House that is friendly to the administration's policy initiatives, you could have legislation passed that puts more money into play. At the same time, the Fed is trying to manage inflation risk. And basically, you would have policy that is at odds with one another. The Federal Reserve trying to do something and the administration counteracting it with their own policy goals and initiatives. It's hard to see how the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve would end up pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, it does seem that they're at odds on their purposes at this point. So I want to touch base on something else. We had an announcement over the weekend that Elon Musk had turned down the board of directors seat offered to him by Twitter. He recently bought 9.2% of the company. And on the news of this, the stock started to plummet. So what's your view on this? Why would a stock react this way?
Yeah, it's difficult to figure out exactly why the stock is reacting, other than to say that there's so many people that are trading in and out of this on the news that there's not a lot of fundamental action, probably. Very difficult to predict in the short term. Certainly not something I am going to be good at. But I think Elon Musk's activism in shaping the future of Twitter is better served by not being on the board. There's an adage on Wall Street, Eric, that if you have somebody that opposes your policy and you're running a company and they're activists, the best thing you could do is make them an insider and put them on the board. Because once they're an insider and on the board, it's difficult for them to be as vocal a critic. So I think my sense is that Elon is being wise if his goal is to really shape the future of Twitter. It might be easier for him to do that as an outsider. Plus, as you pointed out off air, that also gives him the ability to be able to acquire more shares if he chose to. I don't know if that's what he wants to do, but there are some restrictions if you're on the board as to how much you could buy. There's a whole set of rules. So it seems to make sense given what Elon Musk might be doing. He's brilliant. It'll be wonderful to see how it plays out. I wouldn't put too much stock in the short-term pull of Twitter because there's so much just craziness, day traders influencing the short-term action.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk agrees with you that there were too many limitations to him being on the board. And let's face it, Elon Musk has never been somebody that wants to play by the rules. He wants to make his own rules. So yes. I think that's probably a big part of why he chose not to accept the seat.
It makes sense to me. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for being with us, Chris.
It was a pleasure, Eric. Thank you so much.
That's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the Xvadio podcast network, as well, and Chris Calandra's own podcast, Simply Financial, at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. We'll see you next time.